Despite being one of the most acclaimed filmmakers alive and working today, Martin Scorsese cannot click his fingers and manifest a movie out of nothing. Making films is an art form, and there's a lot of work that goes into crafting pieces of cinema. Despite being in his 80s, Martin Scorsese has revealed he has no intention of retiring, despite the recent announcement that 2 of his films he is currently working on have been postponed. After last year's Killers of the Flower Moon, it was announced that Martin Scorsese's next projects would be a biopic about the legendary singer Frank Sinatra, reportedly starring his longtime collaborator Leonardo DiCaprio, as well as a movie called The Life of Jesus, which was said to star Andrew Garfield in the lead role. Both films have reportedly been pushed back, but as of yet we do not know why. Some had speculated that Martin Scorsese was in poor health and unable to take on these big projects. However, Martin Scorsese himself has shot down that idea. The 81-year-old director said, "I have no intention of retiring. The film about Frank Sinatra is only postponed, while the one about Jesus I am working on, I hope God gives me the strength and money to finish them." It's no surprise over the last decade or so, cinema-going experiences have changed, with movie franchises dominating the box office. Martin Scorsese has even criticised the MCU, for example, has changed the cinema-going experience completely. Despite being such an acclaimed director, it's hard to get smaller budget movies funded recently, even with someone like Martin Scorsese attached to direct. You just have to look at The Irishman, which he wanted to take to lots of studios across Hollywood, who completely declined to fund the movie, saying it was too expensive to make and they wouldn't see a return on their investment, which did lead to Netflix funding the movie, which Scorsese had been against because he wasn't too thrilled on how streaming was taking over the movie-going experience. And then we just have to look at his most recent movie, Killers of the Flower Moon, which was funded by Apple, and despite getting a cinematic release, did appear exclusively on the Apple streaming service. Scorsese is currently directing a documentary about shipwrecks off the coast of Sicily, and this is a much more manageable project and more of a project that will likely see a return on investment. According to reports, he is also looking at adapting Marilyn Robinson's Home, and it was also reported last year that he would be working on The Wager, another project that was written by David Grann. David Grann had written the Killers of the Flower Moon book. Scorsese over the last decade or so has tried to get lots of projects off the ground, but they have never come to fruition. For example, he was said to be directing a movie about George Washington called The General. He was working on a Mike Tyson biopic, which even had Jamie Foxx attached to star and even start preparing for the role. And then that got moved to reportedly a HBO TV series, although that hasn't had a major update in many years. Martin Scorsese clearly wants to keep on working for as long as he can, and you just need to look at another old-time director like Ridley Scott, who's just finished Gladiator 2, and Scott is currently 86 years old and is going to be 87 at the end of November, I believe. And we've just seen that Clint Eastwood has released his supposedly final movie, Juror Number 2, and he directed that at the age of 93 and is currently 94 years old. So Martin Scorsese is probably capable of directing movies if he can continue to live a healthy life and live long enough. And he did make the comment over the last few years about what Akira Kurosawa did. He said, "I'm only now beginning to see the possibility of what cinema could be, and it's too late." Martin Scorsese has reached the age Akira Kurosawa was when he died, and Scorsese has stated that "I've lived long enough to be his age, and I think I understand it now." So there is a good chance that Martin Scorsese has some of the best work he could possibly do ahead of him if he really sees what cinema is capable of, and I know he's pushing this big attempt to save cinema from these big franchises, for example. I do have some criticism about Martin Scorsese's movies Killers of the Flower Moon, which I'll go into on another video, because I feel like just because he has the esteem of being a director with a lot of talent, the fact that he needed a $200 million budget to make Killers of the Flower Moon, with about $40 million of that going to Leonardo DiCaprio, seems to be disingenuous, and it's just a way of keeping Leonardo DiCaprio relevant, even though he's clearly not a big return on investment anymore. And I'll probably get a lot of stick for saying that, but just look at the numbers. The Frank Sinatra biopic is reportedly being blocked by Frank Sinatra's family, and that could be true, but the fact that Leonardo DiCaprio to star in that, for example, can demand a salary of up to $40 million, and then the film doesn't even do $200 million, for example, means why is anyone in their right mind going to throw money at it? They're not going to see a return on investment, and one individual gets to walk away with $40 million. That just seems incredibly unfair to me. Perhaps Scorsese needs to lower his expectations and make smaller budget movies again, and he could have probably made Killers of the Flower Moon without Leonardo DiCaprio, for example, and the film could have been profitable if he had a different actor. I feel like his name as a director is enough esteem to get people to bother to go and see it, and if a film has a much smaller, there is a lot less pressure on the film to be a box office hit. But I will talk about that in greater detail in another video in the near future, hopefully. Scorsese also recently said that he wanted to get Daniel Day-Lewis out of retirement to maybe appear in his Life of Jesus movie, and I reported on it earlier this week, but Daniel Day-Lewis has come out of retirement, as it were, to star in his son's directorial debut, Ronan Day-Lewis, and perhaps Daniel Day-Lewis will go on to collaborate with directors again. He does take a lot of time off between projects, and working with Scorsese, as he's done twice in the past in The Age of Innocence and for Gangs of New York. I am intrigued to see what Martin Scorsese can come out with over the next few years, and hopefully he can create some lasting pieces of cinema that do receive the acclaim that he's had earlier in his career, and even more recently. But cinema has changed. It's a movie business at the end of the day, and there is a level of art towards the films that are made in Hollywood, and there's an expectation that these films won't be profitable, but some investors just want the esteem of winning an Academy Award or even being nominated for an Academy Award, for example. And they're sort of the people who will back the projects Martin Scorsese is working on. But maybe, as I've said, he needs to set his expectations a bit lower and kind of get Hollywood studios to see that he can create a project on a smaller budget and make it profitable. I do feel like that's one of the reasons Ridley Scott is making Gladiator 2, is because that's probably a project that they were happy to fund because sequels tend to do very well. But ultimately, I'm excited to see what Martin Scorsese has coming up over the next few years, and perhaps something gets thrown on his desk more recently, and that will get him to produce a film at a much cheaper budget, and he can show off a different side of him as an independent, smaller director once again. But what are your opinions on these two Martin Scorsese movies being postponed? Do you feel like they're going to happen, or is he going to have to seek out other projects to develop over the next few years instead? Let me know in the comments below, give this video a like, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and please make sure to click the bell icon to receive notifications for all of my future videos. That's it for now, thanks for tuning in.